the accessibility of the teachers was huge, and even the accessibility of a principal, of the principal and vice principal and whatnot. If you had an issue or question or concern, they were always very, very accessible. You could call them on the phone and say, call them by first name and arrange to come in and see them, no problem, or speak to them on the phone. It was just a very open door policy, I think, that helped me a lot, because you're putting, like, as a parent, you put a lot of trust in that school.
Sunnybrook School has been in Midtown Toronto for more than 65 years, offering co-ed education for kids from JK to grade 6. It's an IB school, International Baccalaureate, but IB wasn't on the radar for Laurie, Levitt, and her family when they first went looking for new options for their kids' education. Now that both her kids, though, have graduated from Sunnybrook School, Laurie's looking back with a feeling of gratitude, not just for the IB program, but for the close-knit community, the responsive teachers and staff, and enriched offerings including Singapore math that have helped leave a lasting impression on both her children. Take me back to when you first began your family's relationship with Sunnybrook. Where were you at in those days?
Well, Sunnybrook was in our neighborhood, but to be honest, we hadn't considered private school. We started considering it based on the crowding at the local public school, and we looked at a few schools. As I said, it wasn't on our radar. But as soon as we walked into Sunnybrook, there's no other way to describe other than it felt right. It felt like it was going to be the right school for our daughter. We were very, very impressed by a tour that we took by a grade 6 girl, and thought, if our daughter could end up as eloquent as that at grade 6, we were in. And then we started researching the IB component of it, because honestly, we hadn't heard of IB. We didn't know much about it. And that's the beginning.
What was it that sent you through those doors for the first time? Was it a problem you were trying to solve, or a natural moment of transition?
I guess it was a problem we were trying to solve, just because of the overcrowding in our local public school. As she was entering JK, she was a quiet child, and we were a little concerned that she may be overlooked because she was a quiet kid. So we wanted like a more hands-on, smaller class size, that type of thing.
What was the first impression you got?
Very warm. People seemed to know each other. All the teachers seemed to know all the kids that were leading the tours. And honestly, it was a feeling. It felt warm. For us, it wasn't about the facilities. The facilities, we didn't really think of the facilities until later when we were going through the decision making. It was a feeling.
You've mentioned that it's the students who are giving these tours.
Yes, I believe it's probably still that way. It was grade 6 students. My son, when he was in grade 6, so only 2019, he led tours as well. Like, they get all the students to lead the tours to the prospective families or people who are coming through.
How did you find that at the time? Was that a bit different for you?
I liked it. I felt it was better than a parent or a teacher leading a tour. And that was at an open house as well. I felt it was better because we could ask the child their perspective. And at grade 6, they're old enough to know the good and the bad, and they can be frank with you. What's your favorite thing about the school? What do you like least about the school? And we also felt that it was, we could take a look at that grade 6 child and see maybe that's how our child could mature and grow and be able to speak to an adult that they don't know.
And you were saying that your son, your younger child, the second through Sunnybrook, he also took part as a grade 6 tour guide.
Yeah.
What, as a parent watching him go through that, showing off his own school, what did you hear him saying at that time?
Well, we weren't there. So like for his tour.
When he came home at the end of the day, for example, was it Was it at all interesting for you that you'd been on the receiving end of just such a thing, and here he was showing off?
Yeah,
His
yes. I mean, it definitely. I can't imagine him leading a tour. He's, he's quite loud, but he's very proud. He was very proud of his school. My daughter would have been, again, a bit on the quieter side, but my son, both of them are very proud that they went to Sunnybrook. It's a source of pride for both of them.
What are they proud about?
I think that it's a good question. I think that they felt part of the community. They didn't just go to the school, they were part of that school. It's a very small community, which I think helped both of my children in different ways. It helped my daughter kind of come out of her shell more, because when you only have one class of grade 6, that's your leadership. So only having that one class of grade 6, they were all, I don't want to use the word forced, but they were all put into that leadership role. Whereas a bigger school, they're going to pick and choose the kids who are most like leaders. So it gave them all a chance to become leaders. And in doing the tour, I consider that part of a leadership for the tour, for the school. My son is definitely proud of the school, or that he came from the school. But I don't know, I can't imagine it. It's like that whole other world where parents don't see your kids, how they perform at school.
When you were going through that decision-making process, speaking of the road not taken, when you were looking around at other schools, I presume you checked out a few, was there anything else that you saw that made you go, the road not taken? Something that's not at Sunnybrook that was interesting at the time?
Are you saying that, like, other schools that we may have looked at, was there something there that Sunnybrook didn't have? Is that what you're asking?
Exactly. What tempted you at the time?
Well, I think we looked at bigger schools. Both of my children ended up at bigger schools. We looked at single-sex schools. At the time, the bigger schools just seemed too big for us. It seemed, I guess, more like public school size to us. And we didn't really understand co-ed or single-sex education as well, because both my husband and I went to public co-ed schools. So I think it just felt the other schools seemed too big for us at the time with our little kid. Well, it was our daughter that we made the first choice for. So thinking of her and, that sort of thing. We also were a little concerned that we didn't want to have them in one school from kindergarten all the way to grade 12. We wanted some change and transition, thinking that different schools could give them different abilities and different experiences.
On the flip side, was there anything you found appealing elsewhere?
Facilities, definitely, the big schools have the big facilities. So that was definitely something that Sunnybrook didn't have.
Sunnybrook's is an older school with a strong tradition for a school of its size. Would you say?
Absolutely. Yes, I absolutely agree with that. They're very big on their heritage and, how they came about and that sort of thing. So considering, the age and whatnot and the size, yeah, they do. They're very well known. It's unbelievable to me when I'll say, when my kids were in school and someone would ask where they went to school and say, oh, it's a really small school. It's, called Sunnybrook. You won't know it. And they're like, oh yeah, I know that. So, it's more well known than I thought it was.
Tell me about the culture and values that you find there. What has that tradition created as far as the community of learning and its culture and values?
I would say the culture is very much inclusive. One thing we found with an IB school is, living in mid-Toronto, you don't have a lot of different cultures, unfortunately. And being an IB school where people come in from India or wherever, for a few years while their parent is working in Toronto, you get a little bit more culture, and you get first generation culture as well. So it allowed my children to experience a lot more culture than they would normally have had, even in a local public school.
tell me more about the IB program and what happens in the classroom that makes Sunnybrook special.
Okay, as I said, we didn't know anything about the IB when we went in. We did a little investigating. We decided that it sounded interesting, to say the least. It's very knowledge-based and inquiry-based, research sort of idea. And it was interesting to us going back when our daughter in JK started. They have like this unit called Apples and Pumpkins, for example, and it happens in the fall, so they go to a pumpkin farm, just like a lot of JK classes do. But we were really fascinated by how much they delve into the whole concept. They go from, like, you know, life cycles of things to celebrations and how different families celebrate and what they celebrate, and all sorts of things like that, and why celebrations are important to us. And I think we thought like it was a little deep for our JKs, until we heard them talking about it. We didn't realize, we didn't give them enough credit that if they're allowed to, you know, think deep, they actually can at that age. And what we found that surprised us the most, I think we took it for granted with my son just because we'd been through it, but was that as they go from Apples and Pumpkins to JK, they'll do something similar. The units kind of, and I'm not an IB expert, so I don't know the term, I can't remember the terms, but they kind of go, they're linear. And so in SK, they'll do something similar. And we found that as our children went through, they would go back to their learning and connect it, which I found fascinating, to be honest. And as they get older, that learning becomes, it's all tied together. So something they may be doing in math, they'll talk about the unit and pull it in. Something in gym class, they'll pull it in. So it's really interesting the way it's done. And the one thing it really, a couple ways it helped my children, and I can speak from a university level even, was that research. They start research really young and essay writing really young.
Tell me how the IB program has continued to pay off for them.
It's continued to pay off in a few ways. I would say the number one way is that she learned how to write an essay. And I don't mean she learned how to write an essay in her middle or high school. That was built upon. But in Sunnybrook, they start writing essays. I think it's around grade 3, like small, manageable, but they learn the concept of an essay. They learn research. She has always done really well with research, and my son as well, and it quite often comes up on reports, and that I credit to Sunnybrook. They're very good at doing research. They know how to pick from, you know, good research and valuable sources and whatnot. I would say even my son in grade 7 can do that no problem, probably better than a lot of adults. For essay writing, absolutely it helps. The research, like all the tools that you really need in university. Even to a certain extent, I would say public speaking. Even neither of my kids are public speakers per se, my son more than my daughter, but there's a lot of times at Sunnybrook where they have to get up and stay on stage in front of somebody and speak. It becomes almost natural. I remember asking I'm sorry, I'm going off topic a bit here, but I remember asking my son one time, or my daughter, I don't remember who it was now, but they were quite young, and they had to do something in assembly. And I remember I was going to see them do this speech in assembly or introduce, I can't remember what it was. And I remember asking them, because putting my own fears of public speaking, I remember asking them, are you nervous? Like, you know, how are you feeling about this? And they looked at me like, why would I be nervous? Like, I do this all the time. Like, this is not a big deal. And I found that helped both my kids.
I'm wondering, Laurie, do you have any other stories about a time when your kids performed in such a way, something they learned at school that really impressed you? And, you know, thinking of this story you just shared, you're like, wow, I wish I could do that.
I would say most recently, it's easier to remember my son. I would say with the grade 6, they do something called exhibition. It's an IB thing. And in a nutshell, they choose topics as a class. They, get together and they discuss topics, and it changes a bit how they do it every few years. But my son, and they get together in groups usually of a few kids, and they spend quite a bit of time on this topic. And they have to, my son chose homelessness as his topic. And they pick a few, like it's a group. I don't know if the teachers group them or they group, I don't know. And then they choose a topic, and they have to research it. They did right down to like, math of, it incorporated everything. It incorporated statistics, it incorporated the social side of things. It wasn't just a project that I saw in a school, when I went to school. It was really in depth. They really had knowledge of the topic. They also had to do an action because the IB, it's a lot about action and taking action. So learning and then an action that goes with that learning. So what they did was they worked with a charity that goes out and feeds the homeless. So my son and his two partners got together, and parents sent in like bread, and I can't remember if it was peanut butter or what it was actually right now, cheese or something, and they made sandwiches. And then I actually was a parent volunteer who drove them to the place, and the sandwiches would be handed out that night. So it was a way for them to understand that there was something they could do even as a child. And we also made cookies and brought them in as well. We did the cookies at home as a family. But I think there's a lot of action. Another group I remember was doing, oh dear, I want to say it was women's rights, I believe. I'm not 100% sure now. But they made bracelets and they sold them to earn, like to get money for a particular group. So there's a lot of that action. But when at exhibition, there's actually a day where they set up in the art studio and they present their topic. And people come, all the parents come, a lot of the school comes, and outside schools come as well. And they go through and they can ask them questions about it. And they have to be able to stand there at only 12 years old and 11, 12, and be able to ask and answer questions to adults. And some of them are really thoughtful, deep questions. And these kids can stand there and take ownership of their project and explain to an adult the homeless crisis in Toronto. That impressed me a lot, that they could do that. And even some of the more quiet kids in the class, we had so much input on their project, and that they were able to do that without any problem. They also have to present it on stage as well at intervals. I was more used to them seeing them on stage with a more of a spiel, because that was, as I said, that was part of the school. But the fact that they could be asked a question, myself at that age, I wish I could do that. I'd feel put on the spot now, I think.
Well, Laurie, you were saying earlier that one of your best first impressions was meeting that grade 6 tour guide and going, oh, I'd love it if my kids were that articulate.
Right.
Am I right to draw the connection between these two moments?
Exactly. Exactly. And I think, every kid is different. Every kid is going to come out a little bit different, like as we want them to. We don't want them, all coming out the same. But I think for both my kids are very, very different. And my daughter, she was the quiet one. My son is still super loud. And so very different kids, but I still think it gave them a very good background for going on to different schools.
Maybe it's for the classroom side, maybe it's something else, but tell me about how Sunnybrook rose to the challenge of meeting the needs of both your kids, especially with their completely different places they were coming from, the different things they needed. Right.
I think it helps being a really small school that all the teachers really know the kids. There wasn't a lot of staff turnover either. So that helped as well. But just because your child is, only in grade 1, grade 6 teacher will know your child. So they begin to know them, and they do a lot of school activities together with all the teachers and whatnot. Like they do this wonderful school musical at the end of the year, and it's fantastic. But and they do different things throughout the year. So that because it's so small, the students know each other really well. Um, I found it really heartwarming as my little JK or SK would be walking down the hall, and a grade 6 would say hi to them, right, by name, that sort of thing. But the teachers also know them really well, so they know. I guess they know their challenges, right? Um, they knew that my daughter was quiet and shy, so she'd have to be brought out of her shell more. And I don't know how they did it, but it was certainly done. She volunteered in grade 7 at her new school, her new big school, to speak in assembly to kids up to grade 12 about something. And I credit Sunnybrook for that, because she was just so used to doing it there. It didn't even seem odd. Um, and this was at the beginning of grade 7 too. And I think for my son, who's very boisterous, very loud, very much, I hate to use this term, but a boy's boy, our one concern was that maybe Sunnybrook was too small for him. That we did have that in the back of our mind the whole time. And maybe that wouldn't be a problem for him. Somehow it wasn't a problem. I think you tend to think of these problems before they exist. And for him, the small gym, he was very sporty. The small gym wasn't an issue at all, because they do a lot of outside activities. They go to the parks a lot. They utilize the park a lot, which was excellent. They go to outside activities like curling, skating, rock climbing gyms, things like that. So they get them outside of that small gym. So when you go and tour Sunnybrook, one thing you notice is how tiny the gym is. Like, I remember thinking it. I didn't worry about it for my daughter. She wasn't into team sports, but for my son, I thought, oh, is this going to work? Will it be the same? And he had no problem at all. He was, involved in the sports teams. The nice thing about small is that, he wasn't very good at basketball, but he got on the basketball team by grade 6, because there's not a lot of kids, right? So they get a lot of opportunities to do things.
That's another really important relationship that takes place in education, not just with the students, but between the school and its parent community. You're speaking about all kinds of great engagement communities. Tell me more about how the school fostered a good relationship with parents like you, right from the admissions, but continuously.
Once again, I think it helps that it's small. You begin to know the teachers well, the staff well, the principal, that sort of thing. I think the communications are very good, which, especially when you have young children, that's so important, because they're not speaking as much about things going on. So you need to be on top of communication. So they had a weekly email that was sent out. And I think that kept you engaged, definitely. There was community activities like community building, not fundraising. There was a little bit of that, but it's not big. But community building activities. So they would have a pub night, which was really super casual, and you'd go to the local pub, and teachers would come. And so you could see them on a more social basis. So I think that also helped as well, just to help build, like, to foster that kind of friendship a little bit better. And so it wasn't like, your teacher, the parents, and your kid. It was like you were working you felt like you were working together. But they did different things like that. They have a wine and cheese thing at the school run by the Parents Association. And it's just for social. Nothing, there's no fundraising involved. It's just a social activity. To get people together. And there's different activities like that. And I think that really helped. And it really helped that the teachers attended those as well. But I think the accessibility of the teachers was huge, and even the accessibility of a principal, of the principal and vice principal and whatnot. If you had an issue or question or concern, they were always very, very accessible. You could call them on the phone and say, call them by first name and arrange to come in and see them, no problem, or speak to them on the phone. It was just a very open door policy, I think, that helped me a lot, because you're putting, like, as a parent, you put a lot of trust in that school to not just educate your children. Yes, that's important, but to help make them into good people. It's parents' job also too, but you have to have the same values, right? So I think that open door policy and that communication and that sort of thing certainly, and parental involvement really helps, I guess, foster that.
Through the years that your family was with Sunnybrook, I'm wondering what you may have observed or experienced that told you something about their priorities at the time, the projects they're prioritizing, the things they sought to improve or refine or introduce.
Regarding the educational component, we were involved in a transition to a completely different math system. When my daughter was I think she was about in grade 5, they changed the math program. They were following, they give the kids like a math, they have the kids write this math competition, this Canada-wide math competition. And instead of what a lot of other schools do, they'll pick their top math students. Sunnybrook has, I think it's from grade 3 to 6. And they have their kids write this, I'm drawing a blank on the name of it, I apologize. But they have the kids write this math competition, every children in the class. It's just for fun. Like it's not stress for the kids. They don't prepare them for it or anything. They just have them do it. And it helps. I mean, it's fun for the students as well, but it helps the school gauge how they're doing, I think. And during those observations, and then they also ask for input as your child leaves the school. I remember when my daughter left the school, I was asked, how does she do? Like, how is she doing at her new school? Is she keeping up in this? How's her French program? How is she doing in math? Just, they're trying to make sure that they're preparing them, for the next school or next adventure. And so they implemented a new math program. They put it through. It was difficult. Difficult because there was some gaps in the system, where one system taught kids something at a different time. So my daughter struggled a bit. The one thing I will say is I think it was a great idea. My son went all the way through, it's called Singapore Math, went all the way through it. His math skills are amazing because of it. It would have really helped my daughter had she gone all through it from the beginning, but it did help her as well. But the one thing I'll say is when they implemented it, for kids who were struggling, the teachers were there for them to back them up. We didn't have any problems with, her getting extra help she needed to kind of help her. Math was not her strong subject to start with. But so I think they put a lot of thought into rolling it out, but then they were also there to back it up. And, they knew it wasn't going to be easy. In the end, it was a great thing. And Singapore Math is amazing. And I think it was a smart move by the school. But it was a little bit rocky. But they are constantly looking at new ways, I guess. You have to keep up with the times and whatnot. The other project I would say that we lived through was actually a construction project when they purchased the school, the house next door, and they expanded the school, which gave them like a new art studio, which is awesome, and bigger kindergarten classes and different things. And I have no complaints. Like the school handled it really well. It was, living through, the kids were literally going through school, with this construction project going on, but everything was handled quite well. They, that was one thing that we did do some fundraising for. Sunnybrook is not a huge fundraising school. And so the fundraising is always done through the Parents Association. And anybody can go to the meetings and give input and, give their 2 cents. And so it's quite accessible. So any fundraising that's done is parent driven, basically. The school may have a wish list, but it's parent driven. And so we did some fundraising for that and whatnot. But yeah.
Laurie, that's a rear view mirror. That's thinking about, the past decade. What about thinking about the decade ahead? If I were to wave my magic wand and put you in charge of the whole operation, I want to know something new you would try and a strength you would double down on.
Let me go with the strength first. I think a strength I would definitely work with is the public speaking for the kids. Perhaps I would have them, maybe try debating a bit. I only thought of it at a later date with my son in his new school, was that he didn't, I guess maybe debating in class, but maybe if they could do some sort of debate club, and I don't know, maybe they have even now, I don't know, or something like that, so they could get that strength of the public speaking and go with it, because they really do learn it from a young age. So I think maybe even some public speaking contests, that sort of thing. They do a spelling bee contest, they do a geography contest, but maybe a public speaking contest would fit into the curriculum really well. And I think it would help them as they go on to their other schools in grade 6 or after grade 6. The only thing I could think of would be to go along, like when I think of the weaknesses of Sunnybrook, I think the facility itself, it's only so big. So maybe something to do with getting the kids out to bigger facilities more. They do that in gym, but maybe there's something else they could do there. Maybe visiting, it has an amazing library, but maybe visiting a bigger library, a bigger public library or something like that. Just getting them out to see bigger facilities, so that when they do go on, if they go on to a bigger school, it's maybe less intimidating. And maybe doing activities with the kids that take them out of their comfort zone a little bit more. And once again, I'm not, I hate giving criticism when I don't have an answer. But the one thing about Sunnybrook that worked better for my daughter than it did for my son would be that small class sizes. It's great in many ways, because each child, so you'll go from JK, there's only one grade in each class, you move along with your classmates. By the end, they're almost like siblings. So there's a little bit there can be some tension, like sibling tension type thing. So maybe taking them out of their comfort zones a little more and somehow mixing up things a little bit more with a lot more maybe school-wide activities during those times when maybe they just get a little sick of seeing the same faces all the time. But I don't have an answer for that, unfortunately. But it's kind of like when you're a parent of more than one child and you need to separate your children. I'm thinking that kind of thing. My daughter didn't have the issue, my son did. Different dynamics, different classes. Yet at the same time, the flip side of that is that they really were like siblings. It was unbelievable. They knew those kids, so well. And the one nice thing about that was they forgave the kids they forgave the kids for some of their quirks and stuff, whereas maybe in a bigger school they would be made fun of. Whereas there's like, that child is that child, and that's how they've always been. And so the kids were really, they saw them just as that child. They didn't think of any of their quirks or anything as odd. And they were very accepting of each other. But my daughter, I remember when my daughter was choosing her next school, I said to her, where are your friends going? Like, where are they looking at? What schools are they looking at? And my daughter said, I don't really know. It doesn't matter. I'm going to choose my school because I want the school. And I said, oh, you won't miss your friends, doing all the bad parenting thing and putting thoughts into their heads. And she said, no, they'll always be my friends. And it's true. They are still her friends. Quite a group of them from Sunnybrook, because they've almost grown up together. Like, they have grown up together. So I think that's, you can see where that's good and bad. I think the good outweighs the bad, but you can imagine how, when you see the same faces all the time.
With that in mind, I got to ask, your son only recently graduated out of Sunnybrook. For both your kids, what was the dominant feeling for them as they left this school?
The dominant feeling was that they were ready to leave. It's funny because they were really, when we posed the question to my daughter, I know, like, some parents, I'll use my daughter as an example because it was my first experience. As my daughter was approaching, I would say grade 4 or 5, some parents were talking about getting their kids out of Sunnybrook into a bigger school, making, trying to get that coveted spot in the big school. So we started questioning ourselves and wanting her to graduate from Sunnybrook. In the end, we're really glad we did, and we went all the way through with my son as well. So we don't think we made a wrong choice. But I remember in when we were looking for the next school, we asked my daughter, what kind of school are you looking at? And she said, I want big and I want all girls. And I thought, what? It's totally opposite of Sunnybrook. And I think because she had done co-ed and small, she was now ready. She felt, because she was not the most confident child. So the fact that she wanted big surprised us. And I think that helped her by having that nurturing small school want big. She said she wanted, she wanted more people around. She wanted to explore more. She was ready for that. And I think she had the confidence to do that. And the nice thing was, at her age, when she was looking at going into school for grade 7, she knew what she wanted. Whereas had we done it a couple of years earlier, we would have been choosing for her. She drove, we only showed her schools we were interested in, but she drove that, thing, that the search for the school, as did my son, actually. And funny enough,
that sounds like growth.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. She knew what she wanted. She knew what she had, and she knew what she wanted. Right. So it made the choice easier for us, because and it also made the transition easier for her because she chose it. I remember a couple times, complaints from both kids. Oh, they don't, the new school, just getting used to new routines and new rules and whatever. Oh, I don't, complaining about their new school in the beginning. And I'd say, you chose that school. You chose it for a reason, so hang in there. And in both cases, it was a really easy transition. They both chose IB schools. And which I found really fascinating, because, as I said, their favorite thing was the IB at Sunnybrook. And so they both chose IB schools, and the transition was really good for both of them. The size of the school was maybe a little scary, but the transition was really well. They were prepared. They were confident going in.
Any words of wisdom for that parent?
Ooh. Go with your gut. I think go with your gut. Don't overthink it. The one thing that I was doing with my daughter as we were choosing her next school was I was completely overthinking it. So worried about, she's going into grade 7. I was so worried about in grade 12, how's she going to handle the IB? Is she going to be good at it? Is, all these things. And I remember sitting down, the principal sits down with each parent at Sunnybrook and helps kind of, I guess, guide them, tell them what they feel would be a good school for their kid, based on their knowledge of the child and all the feedback they've received through the years from the teachers. And for us, it kind of just cemented what we were already thinking. But they kind of help you in that way. And I remember saying my only fear was my daughter, who was, I would say, average student, was she prepared to go through the IB? Because in grade 11 and 12, it's very rigorous. And you actually earn university credits in grade 12. So going into university, she had a couple credits. And so it's very rigorous. And I was so worried about this. And she sat me down and said, why are you worried about this for grade 7? You're going in grade, she's going in grade 7. Why are you so worried about 12? 1 year at a time. And I would say that to any parent choosing any school at any level. don't overthink it. Don't do what I did and don't overthink it. If it feels good for JK or whatever grade 3 you're going into, and you can see your child there, go with your gut and don't overthink it. Because if it's not working, you can always, you can always find something that will work. But I think overthinking it causes a lot of stress on the parent and the student and the child.